Hello again, and welcome back to my course on microeconomics. This is our second unit here. I'm going to be talking about comparative advantage and the idea of opportunity cost. Let's go ahead and jump in. So what we're going to walk through in this unit is this video is going to be the introduction and the overview, and I'm going to talk about production here. And what will come next is talking about opportunity cost and comparative advantage, and then combining production together, representing the production of a macroeconomy and thinking about growth, and then applying this to the idea of international trade between countries, and specialization across countries. And then a video will conclude. So our unit 2 here deals with some big questions. The first is, why do people exchange goods and services? What benefit do they get from not making everything themselves? This is going to be the idea of specialization. And once we realize that there are some benefits from specialization in trade, we can then start to ask the questions, who benefits from these exchanges? Is there always a winner and loser? Is this kind of a zero-sum exchange where kind of one person is walking away with more and one person is worse off? Or are all of these exchanges win-wins, where both parties are better off after the exchange? The third big question that we'll be dealing with more directly is, how can we best or most efficiently produce a set of outputs from different inputs? And what we'll be thinking about in terms of best is making the most with the fewest amount of resources. We'll be introducing this idea of the production possibility frontier, or what are the set of things that could possibly be made. And a very key idea to this frontier and to efficient production is going to be the idea of comparative advantage, and we'll introduce this idea of opportunity cost. Now, to go to this question of efficiency, the idea is that multiple people are faced with multiple tasks. How can we maximize total outputs? What we're going to do to speak to this question and to think about it is to introduce a simplified model of production. This model is going to show us that it's possible to increase total output through specialization in trade. The idea here is that if each person concentrates on activities for which they have the lowest opportunity cost, that's going to mean that they're giving up the least amount to make something. This is going to turn out to be beneficial in terms of increasing efficiency. Now, we've talked about comparative advantage. I've mentioned that term, and this is going to be a key term in this chapter, and I want to contrast it with the idea of what we'll be calling absolute advantage. Absolute advantage means that you can do a task faster. It takes you fewer hours to do a set task. Or if we're just talking about resources in general, time is the main resource we'll be talking about in this unit, you're using fewer absolute resources to complete the task. In contrast, opportunity cost is the comparative advantage goes to opportunity cost. What else could we be using these resources for? What's the second best thing that we could have done with them? Absolute advantage relates to the amount of resources that are being used, time, how much you're spending to complete the task. Comparative advantage, in contrast, is about what's being given up. Right? What would be the end result of those resources? Right? What else could those resources have been doing? And that difference between absolute advantage and comparative advantage is subtle, but it's crucial. Throughout this unit, I will be introducing different examples to illustrate the difference between absolute and comparative advantage. The engine for illustrating these differences is going to be a particular model. It's going to be the model that we're calling the production possibilities frontier. So as we mentioned in our first part of this course, models are crucial to understanding the world. They are simplifications of the world, but that simplification allows us to have insights, allows us to think about what's going on. The goals of our PPF model is to show the combinations of outputs that can be produced, and to illustrate trade-offs between one good in terms of the other good. So we're going to be sticking to two good models. That's going to be our simplification. And so we're going to look at trade-offs between producing goods. This model is going to allow us to speak to that question of efficiency. A couple components and assumption of this model. We're generally going to be dealing with an individual producer. It can be a person, it could be a company, or it could be a whole country. And we'll be expanding this later in our unit to look at when we have multiple individuals producing, how can we combine their production? But we're just building on the core of this model, which is this individual producer. The individual producer is going to be having a fixed amount of resources they can use. Generally, we're going to be sticking to the resource being time. And all of the examples that we're going to look at are generally going to simply have two goods. That gets at the trade-off, but it keeps it simple and tractable. So the individual is going to split their time between the two goods, split those resources, and we're also in our PPFs, generally speaking, and I'll tell you when this changes, we're going to have constant trade-offs between the two. So there's no, no economies of scale, no getting worse over time. The trade-off is going to be the same whether you're producing 1, 20, or 50 for that individual. And that's going to change when we have multiple individuals or multiple individuals being combined into economy. We're going to represent this production possibility frontier three ways. We're going to represent it by looking at a resource table. So this is going to show the amount of a resource, generally time, that is going to be needed to produce 1 unit of a good. The second way we can represent our production possibilities is to talk about a production. What can we produce in a certain amount of time, or to be more general, given amount of resources. Right, so these are the kind of inverse of each other. And finally, we're going to represent our production possibilities frontier graphically. So we're going to, in our two good model, each good is going to take one axis, and then we're going to show the maximum amount that can be produced. We're going to show all the possibilities on this graph. To be successful in this course, in this unit, you need to get very comfortable moving between all three of these different ways to represent production possibilities. You need to recognize when one is being used and when you need the other, and how to move between the two, or the three. So the first one, the resource table, here's an example of it. The goods that I'm going to use in this beginning section are coffee and donuts. And so we have Parker here who can make a cup of coffee in 12 minutes and a donut in 6 minutes. Right? And so this table is saying how much time, resource, does it take to make 1 unit of the good. The second way we can represent Parker's production possibilities is talk about the maximum amount of the good that can be made with 1 unit of resource. Our resource is time, and our unit is going to be 1 hour. So we can move between the two by taking an hour, which is 60 minutes, and dividing it by the 12 minutes per cup of coffee. This shows us that in 1 hour, Parker can make 5 cups of coffee. We can do the same transition in talking about the number of donuts he can make with 1 hour. 60 minutes divided by 6 minutes per donut gives us 10 donuts. Now, one thing I want to emphasize as you move between these tables, we often will drop units from these tables. So you'll see this represented as maybe just a 12 and a 6 showing up here instead of minutes per coffee, minutes per donut. But the units are actually helpful, and they're helpful in moving between the two, and helpful for understanding what kind of multiplication or division you need to do conversions between resources such as time and amounts. The third way that we represent production is graphically. Economists love to use graphs, and so what we're representing here is we have coffee on, we put it on the y-axis here, and donuts on the x-axis. No reason it could have been donuts on Y and coffee on X, but we're showing all the possibilities on this red line in terms of what can be produced. And this is with 8 hours. So we're actually, you can think about taking this production table and multiplying it by different combinations of 8 hours. Right? So 8 hours times 5 coffees per minute is giving us the max here of 40 coffees. 8 hours times 10 donuts is giving us or donuts per hour, is giving us the max of 80 donuts. Now what I want to do is use these 3 ways to talk about a question. How much of each would Parker produce if he split his 8 hours? If he spent 4 hours working on coffee and 4 hours working on making donuts? Right? All right, let's look at the resource table here. So what we can do here is we have our 4 hours. We are converting it to minutes by multiplying 60 minutes per hour. I'm emphasizing units here. and we're taking the 12 minutes per coffee and dividing. Now, sometimes it's hard to remember, should I multiply or should I divide? And if we do this here, we're going to get 20 cups of coffee. And these units are what is going to help you, because the units here nicely cancel out. Your hours cancel out here. We have minutes divided by minutes. And then what we're left with is 1 over cups of coffee, which is just cups of coffee. And so we know that we're saying how many cups of coffee can we make in 4 hours? That's the question. The answer should be in cups of coffee. And so if you're careful with your units, you will be getting the correct answer and doing the either multiplication or division correctly. We can do the same exercise for looking at donuts as well. That gives us 40 donuts. So that's how we answer this question using the resource table. We can also answer this question using the production table. Right? So here we have the amount that can be made for each hour. This is actually a little bit simpler because we're just doing multiplication. 5 coffees per hour times 4 hours is 20 coffees. 10 donuts per hour times 4 hours is 20 donuts. And again, those units are canceling and giving us the correct units in the end. Finally, we can represent this graphically. And so if we're splitting our time, 4 and 4, we're essentially moving down from the left to the right on this curve. Right? We're giving up some hours working on coffee to get donuts. Right? And so starting at this point where we were doing all in on coffee, we need to give up kind of 4 hours. And having 4 hours left to work on coffee allows us to have 20 cups of coffee. Right? What we're gaining with that 4 hours, right, the slope tells us that for everything we're giving up, right, the rise is 1 right here, we are getting 2 donuts. Right? So in giving up the 20 cups of coffee, we're going to be able to make 40 donuts. And now we're producing at this point of 40-20, this point on the production possibilities frontier. Now, there's other ways to get at this number, but what I'm emphasizing with this graphical view is what we're going to be getting into very soon, thinking about the trade-off. Right? The trade-off is the slope of the curve. What we're giving up, right? In this instance, moving left to right, we're giving up coffee versus what we're getting. In this case, we're getting donuts. So the slope captures the trade-off. Very key portion of this unit. So to summarize the introduction here, we had those 3 ways of representing production, that resource table, the production table, and the graph. It shows what is possible, what can be produced, and it illustrates the trade-offs between getting more of one good in terms of what we have to give up of another. This is going to allow us to speak to efficiency. And so that's the introduction and an overview of this model. Our next video is going to be diving a little deeper into opportunity cost and talking about the idea of comparative advantage. So I hope you continue to follow along on these videos, and I hope you find them useful. If you have questions, feel free to send me an email. I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. Until then, take good care.